Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's third and final webinar with the Connecting to New York's Collections on preserving digital materials. This morning we'll explore managing and providing access to digital content. For those of you who have joined us last month, this is the third webinar in the series, so I'd like to welcome you back. For those of you who are new, I am Priscilla Brendler, the Executive Director for Greater Hudson Heritage Network. And Greater Hudson is the statewide cultural service organization formed to advance and advocate for the preservation and interpretation of historical, ethnic, and cultural heritages. We deliver resource assistance, professional collections care workshops and trainings, webinars for any organization, heritage keepers who collect, preserve, and interpret material objects at their site. Greater Hudson also administers the statewide conservation treatment grant program on behalf of NISCA. We've been re-granting approximately about $100,000 since 2000, so that's a little over $2.2 million to date. And these funds go to eligible museums and cultural institutions who have collections in their institutions that are open and accessible to the public. These grants support the professional conservation treatment procedures which aid in the stabilization and the preserving of these very rare objects. Our state is incredibly fortunate to have this granting program, as we're one of only 2 in the entire nation that have it, and thanks to the New York State Council on the Arts, we're able to bring this funding to you. The grant deadline for this year has already passed. However, please mark your calendar for next year, June 1st, 2015, as the deadline. We'll be making the announcements typically in January. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, let us know. Take a look at your collections and see if there's any objects that could use some conservation. But before we begin today's webinar, I'm going to pass it off to Carrie Sclafani. She's Greater Hudson's Program Manager and our technical producer for today's webinar, and she's going to walk you through some of the IT Q&As.
Okay, good morning, everyone. You may have noticed that you had 2 options for listening to this webinar, either through your computer speakers or by calling in. If you are calling in, you may have noticed you were supplied with an audio pin. You do not need to use the audio pin. Because of the number of attendees on today's webinar, we have muted you all. If you enter the pin and we have you muted, it will cause static on the webinar. Rest assured, you don't need the PIN to hear the webinar. If you did enter the PIN, please hang up and recall into the webinar without using the PIN. If you are listening through your computer speakers and are having trouble with the sound, here are a couple of quick fixes you might try. First, close out of any other programs you might be running, but don't close out of your internet browser because you might log out of the webinar. Second, if you're hearing an echo, you may have mistakenly logged in twice. If you are using a weak or wireless network or a wireless device as a hotspot, you may have trouble with the sound. Worst case scenario, you can always change from the VoIP option or voice over internet protocol, which is listening through the computer, to listening through the phone. Just click on the telephone option button on your attendee dashboard. Dial in with the number provided and the webinar code, not the audio pin, and you can resume listening. Be aware there will be a slight delay. At the bottom of your attendee dashboard, there is a box for you to ask questions. These can be technical questions for me, like what is the call-in number, or questions about the webinar material for Mary to answer. Rest assured, we can see all of the questions or comments. You won't be able to see them, but you're not just sending them off into the void. We'll be saving the questions to ask during specific question breaks in the program. Okay, I think that's about it. I'm going to turn it back over to Priscilla now to tell you more about IMLS.
Thank you, Carrie, very much. Well, for today's webinar, we wanted to tell you a little bit about the Connecting to New York's collection. This is a partnership between Greater Hudson Heritage Network and 19 other heritage organizations through New York State. And thanks to the generous funding of IMLS, we are able to bring you the Connecting to Collections program and specifically the Connecting Collections webinars. As you can see, if you're interested in more information about IMLS, you can go to www.imls.gov. So the Connecting to New York's program, we have 19 heritage organizations throughout the state who are working with us to present these programs. And these are all activities based to address specific preservation training needs in connection with types of collections that were identified as at risk in a New York State planning survey that was done a few years ago. The objects that were identified as at risk are no surprise to any of us. It's books and paper, photographic collections, digital materials, and frankly, all other historic objects. The training is being provided via a 4-part webinar series. This is the 4th in the series and actually, very sadly, the final of this particular webinar series. We also have web-based how-to video tutorials. We have our website, which is the www.cnys.org, which is a clearinghouse for the preservation best practices and a landing page for all of the content for the webinars. We also have a circuit rider mentoring program, which is available throughout the entire New York State, where we have a consultant come to you for free for a half-day site visit and be able to help you with some of your collections care. I'll talk a little bit about that later on in today's webinar. Finally, all of these activities will be available throughout New York State until the end of October of this year. Today's webinar is on the preservation of digital collections. As I mentioned, this is the final in the series. In this webinar, we will discuss the management of and access to digital content over the long term. Effective management of digital content requires planning, implementation, and sustainability, and includes organizational aspects such as policy development and training, and necessary resources such as designated funding. Long-term access to digital content is the purpose of digital preservation. Providing access addresses the concepts, roles, and challenges involved in making digital content accessible over time, not of providing real-time access in the present. This webinar will also include a wrap-up of the digital preservation principles discussed throughout the series and will encourage participants to identify preliminary steps for digital practices in their own institution. If you missed any of the earlier webinars, don't worry, you still have the ability to join in. What you can do is give us a call at Greater Hudson, which you can see the phone number there, or email us, and we'll be able to put you in contact with the earlier webinars so you can catch up on that. Today we are incredibly delighted to welcome back today's presenter, who is Mary Molinaro. Mary serves as the Associate Dean for Library Technologies at the University of Kentucky Library. Her work and research interests include digital preservation, personal digital archiving, and digital library development. She has served as the primary investigator on a number of projects centered on providing digital access to cultural heritage materials. She serves as an instructor and is on the steering committee for the Digital Preservation Outreach and Education Program at the Library of Congress. And Mary has great interest in supporting library infrastructure and planning in developing nations. She's done lots of extensive work in libraries in Ecuador and served as a Fulbright Senior Specialist in Tunisia. So we want to welcome back Mary, and why don't we turn the program over to you today, Mary?
Hello, how are you? How is everybody today? I need to be able to share my screen, I guess. So
okay, we're in the midst of moving it on over to you.
Okay.
Be there 1 second.
Okay.
As we go through cyberspace.
All right.
It should be, there you go.
Can you
Do
see it?
I can see it. You just want to put it on slide mode and you're all set.
Okay, we're all set. Let me do this. There. How's that look?
Looks
that look okay to
beautiful.
you?
Fabulous.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm really pleased to be back with you today, and let me just hang on just 1 second. Yeah, and you know, I'm kind of sad to see these webinar series go away. I've really enjoyed it doing this over the summer, and hopefully there are some of you who have been at all of the sessions. And as Priscilla mentioned, if you have not, you know, there's still time to go back and re-watch that or sign in and get that content, because it really is a cumulative kind of program. Not to say that you can't watch today's and get a lot out of it. Hopefully you will. But the other part kind of fills in that backstory for you, and I would encourage you, if you have not watched those, to sign in with Greater Hudson and do that. All right. I would like to, I'm going to review a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about what we did in webinars 1 and 2, so you have some sense of that, and just as a review for people who have participated throughout the summer. And in the first webinar, we talked about identifying content, identifying and selecting content. And so the basics are that you really need to look at whatever content you have and go through all of that content. it may reside on phones, on cameras, on hard drives, in a number of places throughout your organization. And you may have born digital content that comes to you on hard drives from someone else. And so really creating an inventory for that content is the way to start. You really should be as comprehensive as possible and try to get everything listed, even though you're not going to deal with everything, including your web pages. You may not be dealing with that content immediately, but you at least have to have a list of it so that it will allow you to prioritize that content and then plan for the future so that you know where you're going with your program. And as you're looking at that content, you really, in selecting what you're going to preserve over time, you really need to go through and ask yourself some questions. And then you stop if and when the answer is no to any of these questions. For instance, as you look at your content, does it have value? And does it have value, and will it have value for the long term? Does it fit the mission of your institution? Does it go along with what you've set out as for your institution is really your thing, your mission? Is it technically feasible? I often talk to people who think about their website and doing, capturing that. That is really not for the faint of heart. I would never start there. You would start much easier on images or text files and then work up to your website. So that may be one consideration. And then access. Is it possible to make the content available? And we're going to talk more about that today. That's really at the heart of the last part of today's webinar, is how to make that content available and make it accessible for the future. And as you look at your content, you will have this inventory, this good, thorough inventory, and as you think about it, you need to prioritize your review and think about what is it that you have. Where do you start? Do you start, for instance, with the most significant content? Is it something that your board of directors or a major donor gave to you, and so or it's something that's really the heart of what your organization wants to say about itself? Is it that? Or is it something that you have a lot of it? You have a huge collection of glass plate negatives that need to be digitized and made accessible because nobody can look at them otherwise. Or is it something that people ask for all the time? You keep pulling out these same objects over and over for people to look at, and maybe it's the most requested something that you have to make available. Things that are easiest or oldest or the newest, has high interest for the general public because of a topical focus of that content. Or some organizations have a local mandate or some kind of legislative mandate, and this often goes to records, public records and the like, but you may be the custodian of those kind of public records, so that may be a consideration. And then in the webinar 2, the second webinar, we talked about what to store, we talked about metadata, various options for storage, repository infrastructures, how to select those and what kind of infrastructures are available. We talked about preservation planning and some about disaster planning. So if you missed those 2 webinars and any of that sounds like something that you may want to delve into, I encourage you to go back to Greater Hudson, give Priscilla a call, and sign in and get access to that content. So today we're going to talk about first about managing content, then we're going to talk about access. But we're really thinking about this long-term management of your content. We're not talking about managing it for the short term. And by long-term, we're not talking 50 years here. Just think how much the world of technology has changed in, say, the last 20 years. We're thinking 3, 5, 7, 10 years. That is really long-term for digital objects. But the thing is, as you think about long-term access, you want to position yourself so that you can make those changes as technology changes. You don't want to get yourself boxed into a corner where it's going to have to be starting all the way over again or getting your content out of one big system into another big system at a high cost or a loss of that content. Every time you move digital content, that's when it's at risk. That's when it's the most at risk. And so we want to really avoid that at all costs and think about that as we move forward. Now, as Priscilla mentioned, this is part of the Digital Preservation Outreach and Education, the DPO program at the Library of Congress. And these are the 6 modules that make up a curriculum, that curriculum for DPO. We started out the first 2, in the first webinar we had Identify and Select and then Store and Protect. We've talked about that already this morning. This Manage. What provisions are needed for long-term management? This is what we're going to talk about today, and then we're going to go on to Provide. But this module really gets to planning. It's less technical, but more on what planning and what policies do you have in place and that will assure this long-term access for your content. But this is how it fits into the rest of the modules. And here's a visual on that. We started out with Identify and Select in the middle, surrounded by Protect and Store. And now that's all wrapped up in Manage, and then Providing Access to Users is the user-facing forward look at this topic. And so the question really is, why do we emphasize management, and how did we get there from where we started talking about it way back in the dark ages of digital access back in the mid-90s? This document was put together, this Preserving Digital Information. It was done by the Commission on Preservation and Access and the Research Libraries Group. This has been one of the main documents on which all of our work since has been based, and it is still valid. The good practices have been emerging since this report was made, and it really set the stage for what's to happen up through today. So if you have not seen this report, I would urge you to go back and take a look at it. It's readily available, and so this is something that is really one of the cornerstones and foundations for the work that we've done in the digital preservation community since then. Now, when we think about management, we really think about a balanced way of looking at management. Good management should be balanced. Hang on a second, I've got something covering my notes and I need to move it. Okay. Organizations focus on technology concerns with the exclusions of this good preservation management. Often people will jump into the technical aspects and not think so much about the management aspects. They think about what are these tools that we can use without having the underpinnings of a good preservation planning program. And so it really goes back to these 3 aspects of planning: organizational requirements and objectives, the technology opportunities and change, and then resources, which would be your staffing, your funding, equipment, etc. And Nancy McGovern, in her digital preservation management workshops, she's been doing this since about 2003, I guess. It uses these 3 aspects to management in this effective approach, and she likens it to a 3-legged stool. Without any one of these, you're going to be off balance and you will not be successful. So you really have to hit on all 3 of these aspects as you think about the planning. So, you know, if you don't know what your organization's about and what your mission is, that's a huge thing, and you have to be following along with that. Along with the technical opportunities, and we've talked to some in these other workshops or webinars about the technology aspects of this. And really, resources with your funding and that is the other piece. Without all of that, you're not going to be able to move forward easily. So let's talk a little bit about those people skills and what kinds of skills are needed for this work. Things that really add up to a balanced program include things like policy development, project management, repository and software management, your actual technical people, metadata. That's often catalogers have turned into metadata librarians over years, legal expertise, and then marketing. All of those people may not be all in one person. All those skills may not be in one person. But there are probably people that you have access to that could fill in those various pieces and parts. So you might think about who in your organization would have those skills that could contribute to this overall set of skills that will be so necessary as you move forward. Now, often that technical expertise, that repository software management and programming, that's something that is often lacking in small organizations. But there are various ways that you could actually reach that. You could, maybe outsource it or partner with someone that does have it. So there are opportunities there, but you just have to be creative and think about how do you fill in this set of skills, because you need every one of these skills as you move forward. As we think about policy issues, and the benefits are endless for having good policies and a preservation policy as you move forward. One thing it does is tell everybody, it tells the world that you have an institutional commitment to that content that you have. Often organizations are spending a lot of time and a lot of energy in creating content and scanning collections. And you really need to have an overall plan for what are you going to do with this content as you move forward. As you spend all this time and energy and money in scanning collections and making them accessible, it's just not good enough to put them up just on a Facebook page that doesn't have that preservation underpinning, because you do not want to have to do this again. If it's not preserved and something happened, you've lost a lot of time, energy, money, and access for your users, frankly. So if you have a good preservation policy that really says to the world that you have an institutional commitment for this, as you work through these policies also, it really helps build your digital preservation team within your organization. And you may say, well, it's just myself, this is it. But it really, as you think about who's going to do this work and how are you going to do it, you will inevitably end up working with others, whether it's partnering with another organization that's of similar size and has a similar mission. It's really helpful to have more than one person thinking these issues through and making clear decisions as you move forward. If you have those requirements for, say, records, having a good policy really demonstrates compliance to those agencies that are keeping track of that for you. And so that's another reason for and benefit of having this preservation policy. You can identify issues that are coming forward, your challenges. It raises awareness in your whole organization. It helps really manage those expectations as you think about your stakeholders and who's involved with that, be it a set of donors, whether it be a board of directors, whether it's your local community. You can think about who are your stakeholders and what do they expect of you as you manage your objects and digital representations of your objects. And it really, as you think this through, as you work through these various issues, it really helps you define and put down on paper what are the roles and responsibilities, who is going to do what, and it allows you to really identify those gaps. You may come to some of the questions as you think these things through, think, I don't have anybody doing this. Well, this tells you something that you can work toward and identify those things that can, a strategy, figure out a strategy for how you are going to do that. Because as you look forward, you think, well, I don't have anybody to provide this technical expertise, then you know you can put that on your list of something that you need to work on and that will fill in that missing piece of it for you. And as you think about the technical things, organizations really need to periodically review and make decisions about the technologies that will help you preserve your digital content. That includes things like servers, computers, software tools, utilities, repository software packages, and even technologies that you sign on to, like a cloud service or an outsourced kind of service. You need to be really systematic and intentional about evaluating that repeatedly. It's not like you can fix it once and it stays fixed. That's one thing about technology, is that it moves on very quickly. As we think about the last 10 years and how much things have changed, even with the growth of mobile devices and that, you need to be able to adapt to those changes. You may have websites that are available or some kind of a content management system that's providing access to your content. You need to think about how's that going to look on a mobile device and how are we going to provide that, because users' expectations change very rapidly along with the changing technology. So as you document that process and outcomes, it will make the next time easier. As you document how are you making these decisions and be very intentional about it, then the next time you have to do this, you can think back on that and have it, it may not even be you doing it the next time, but it gives this kind of chain of command for somebody doing that so they know what the thinking was as you did it before. And outsourcing to service providers is increasingly an option, and decisions should be as thoughtful about that process to buy and implement technology as it was for running your own system in-house. Technology changes and organizations can plan to keep up with it, and this reflects your resources and your requirements. So you really have to think about that. So when you look at this, you've got all these aspects to it that are listed here on this slide. Now, as you think about selecting technologies, there are things, whether you're doing it in-house or whether you're outsourcing, that you really need to think about, and the software itself. So as you think about that, here's some characteristics of what we consider really sound software. Documentation and that it's written in computer language that is well documented. It's not something that somebody wrote on their own that's not doesn't have any hope of being sustained or moving forward, and that it's available on a wide variety of platforms. You don't want something that's written just for a Macintosh computer or just in that won't really display or function with the various kind of devices that you might have in your organization. You want to make sure that there's a commitment by the creators and developers to carry it forward. I tell you, we've learned this lesson the hard way here at University of Kentucky, and many other organizations have. This isn't just solely our problem here at UK, that this happens as you move forward in technology, particularly with some if you partner with people and then they pull that support, it can leave you scrambling. And we had that happen to us, where we had one system, we were married to it, we put a lot of energy into it, and then they pulled the support and we had to migrate to something else. Now, you can't always prevent that, but you want to make sure that as you make these decisions about your content and your digital objects, that you are well positioned to move those into something. So an exit strategy is something, if you're looking at an outsourced vendor, what is the exit strategy? You need to think about that. And those are questions that we are absolutely 100% that is on the table when we talk about securing our content with a vendor or with an outsourced kind of operation. Is, say if you closed, what would happen to our content and how would that happen? And how would we move forward with that? And you want to make sure that your licenses really match up with what you want to do with it. So make sure that you're able to reuse content, or that that it's a full package. so that it's modular, that you can pull out a piece and put something else in and it'll still work. Now, when you think about funding, this is something that is a problem for many organizations, particularly in this time where resources are scarce. And it's really one of those things that's a hard thing, is making sure that funds are set aside for digital preservation. Because this is something that it's relatively new, and many organizations have not planned for it. And it's one of those things that it's hard to add on a whole separate budget line for digital preservation, because all your other activities did not go away and in fact are likely costing you more. And so you really need to think about how this is going to work and how are we going to get the money and the funds to do this. And one thing that I've found is it may not be all in one budget line, the things that your funds that are allocated for digital preservation. It may be spread across your organization. There may be pieces of it here and there that add up to make it so that your organization is adequately funded for it. Here again is one of those places where you can look at it, you add up all the costs that, you have a cataloger over in one part, you have that's doing some metadata for you, you've got administrative and technical kind of people, but you need to add that up to make a compelling case, and you may find that there's a gap. But this, again, gives you the list on what you need to work on so that you can fill that gap. That gap analysis is something that has to happen every aspect of your planning process anyway. And your funding, as you make the case for this, for spending the money on it, one thing that I often do is add up all the money it cost us to create the content. If it's content that we've created ourselves, what did it cost? How much grant money did we put into it? That if we had to redo it, it would be really hard to get that money again. That's one thing. All the staff time, all the every aspect of it, that all the costs, be as comprehensive as possible as adding up what it cost you to get the content in the first place. If you bought access to content, that would be a cost. And then as you think about that, as you make the case, say, we've got all these resources we've put into this. If we don't make this commitment to digital preservation and preserving it, we risk this loss. And this is something that we could not recreate without great cost to the organization, both in terms of time and money. And that is one way that you can make a compelling case. And it's challenging to do this, but it's really, really important to make sure that you do this. And you can track over time what your organization has committed to this kind of activity, and it should be a growing number. For many, many years here at the University of Kentucky, we built our program on the backs of grant money. And at some point, I just showed a diagram of what we had done in terms of building this program with grant money and external money, and what the library actually had put in the ground and what they had committed. And it was that visual look at that. The grant money dwarfed the library's commitment, and that's how we made a case to actually put our money where our mouth is and put some resources toward this. So that a similar kind of thing, you might be able to do a similar kind of thing with your organization. Now, digital preservation standards have been emerging since that 1996 report, and the digital community has a good foundation of standards that really serve as this basis for good practice. And you can see here are some major pieces that have been developed over time. And as you look at these different reports in this will give you the foundation for creating a planning document for yourselves. Some of them are really quite extensive and really kind of daunting as you think about it. That trustworthy repositories audit and certification track, there is a whole process where you certify repositories, and you likely will not be doing this with your repositories. This is something that it's a big process, and it's very involved. But I tell you, looking at the document that is used to do that certification is so helpful as you think about the pieces and parts of your planning program that you need to put together, because it lists all the details, all of the gory details. And so as you think about that, you think, oh, I never even think about this aspect of it. And so it really serves as a guide to helping you formulate a good plan. Now that has really morphed into this audit and certification of trustworthy digital repositories, which is now an ISO standard. This is being managed out of the Center for Research Libraries in Chicago. And they have certified, it's a really big process, and they've only certified a handful of repositories. And just think of how many repositories there are out there that have not received this certification. So it gives you kind of a sense of what kind of a process it is. It is fairly expensive to have it done. It takes a long time to have it done, but those principles are really solid. And so you'll see repositories that are really the big ones, and the vendors themselves, or these outsourced kind of solutions, will be the ones that are going to get putting their practice to the test in getting certified. But again, as you look at these documents, and you might take a look at them and go, oh my gosh, why is she having me look at this document? Because they're fairly technical, but there are nuggets in here that will help you serve as a guide if you're going down this process. And I really highly recommend that you take a look at these documents and really consider all the aspects to this building a plan. Now, when you think about aspects of a trusted digital repository, here are the pieces and parts that make up everything that creates a trusted digital repository. Now, these attributes have been used since 2002 and have really served as a guide for development of digital preservation programs. And it is worth looking at as you review this, if you haven't seen it already. And as you look at those documents on the last slide, this is the meat of it right here, which will give you those three legs of that organizational stool, that organizational factors, technological factors, and resources in these characteristics. So you have this community standards, that it meets a standard. It's not something that you just wrote on your own and doesn't meet those things that are now called community standards. There's a commitment from your administration, and responsibility. Management of it. What is the organizational viability? Will your organization be here? And what is going to make sure that that is something that will continue? That your organization will be here. What happens if your organization goes out of business, for instance, or closes? What happens to that digital content? So you want to make sure that organization is viable, not just your repository. When you think about the financial sustainability, how much money or how financially secure is the organization and your digital preservation program? Think about the infrastructure that you have, the technology that is the underpinning, and how suitable is it for your organization and for the content itself. The system security, protections and controls. Can somebody hack into your system and take it down? That's a big thing, and that's something where it takes some technical expertise to make sure that your system is secure. And so that's a piece that you need to think about. You don't want somebody going in and erasing all your master files. And you think, well, who would do that? Well, there are all these hackers out there that do these kinds of things, so you just have to protect yourself. And then documentation. Are your decisions documented, and is there that accountability for your policies and your procedures? And really the underpinning of this is trust but verify, and that's something that is an underpinning for all of this. You want to make sure that those characteristics are in your plans and your policies and your designated funding. Now, planning for digital preservation is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing part of managing this digital content over time. And it involves really overall planning for the program and identifying strategies for preserving the specific kinds of digital content that your organization is preserving. So every organization really needs to do a self-assessment and updates those results periodically. And using those requirements like the principles in the previous slides. An audit of the program can be done when the time comes in a formal way or by working with your peer organizations. And preservation really requires a show me, not trust me approach. You need to make sure that it is documented and that that it's out there in a transparent way. You don't want to just say, think about, oh, do we have resources to support this? Oh, yeah, we do. You need to make sure that that is verified and that that is a part of this planning process. So you need to think not just about your own internal digital preservation program as you're thinking about this, but think about the business continuity, as I mentioned, and disaster planning. Disaster planning is a big thing. You know, what happens if you have a big storm that takes out some of your servers? You know, you need to incorporate all of that into your planning documents. So as we think about outcomes for this and where are we with this? And so as you think through this, you need to think about your standards. What are those standards that really indicate good practice, and what will that look like in your organization? How will your organization demonstrate good practice, and how do you do that? How will you document that so that everybody knows what it is, and how will you use that as a document moving forward? And I mentioned this gap analysis as we go, as you go through this process, and this is something that every organization has gaps. Don't think that you'll answer all these questions and you have it all covered. Likely you won't, and I've never met an organization that had it all covered yet, frankly. This is just not something that happens by chance or by good fortune. It's something that requires preservation planning and good organizational planning, and that's how you get to that end goal. You need to move incrementally through that, but you do that through this gaps analysis and use that as a tool. It's like, where are we now and where do we want to be? And so, and then how do we fill in those gaps that exist in our organization? And this has been something that we've been working on here at the University of Kentucky for years, really years. We started out and it's like we didn't have any of these things in place. And then over time we identified where we want to go, and without that kind of roadmap, you're just kind of stabbing in the dark. And so if you think about where you want to go and what you want it to look like ultimately, and then where are those gaps, then you can systematically work on filling those gaps and meeting that over time. So we're going to take pause here for questions and see if there are any questions that you have. Hopefully this has sparked some thought on your part, and as you've thought about the previous two webinars and then this planning aspect, you might have some questions about, about the process. And this is a time where it would be really good if you ask those questions.
Hi there, Mary. It's Priscilla. We do have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, our organization is just starting out with this. How do we get started in a way that makes sense?
Okay. I would say if this is new to you, and it likely will be, I expect that if you're getting started, many people are as well, that you need to just start at the beginning. And again, I would urge you to go through and identify go through the content from those first two webinars, either review that and just start out with that, but then make a list of your resources about where you are. And go back to some of those documents like track and just think they're organized by category. And so you could just run through these questions, and it's time consuming. I've got to be honest. It's one of those things that is time consuming, but it's worth the time if you want to preserve your content. And my guess is that you do, and you should. This is my advice, that you should. It is worth starting at the beginning with this. And as you look at what kind of content, as you look at the list that you've created of the content that you have, and add up how you got it, and and you prioritize it, and you think about how you're going to keep it safe over time, and all those pieces and parts, as you work through these documents like that track document, this will help you immensely in identifying where to start. And I would say one piece of advice I generally have for organizations is don't let yourself get overwhelmed and think, oh, I'll never get there. It's so big, because it is a big thing, and it can be. If you look at the whole of it, you think, oh no. When I first printed out that track document, it's like an inch thick of printouts. It's really extensive. And I thought, oh my gosh. But if you start out small, start out with one piece of it and do that to best durability. Scan over the whole thing and then pick out those pieces and just start building it, and then documenting those decisions that you make. Then, all of a sudden, 6 months, if you keep at it, 6 months later you'll look up and you will have made a lot of progress. And so my advice is to try not to get discouraged and get started with that, so that you can move forward in a way that makes sense for you.
Okay, but tying onto that, well, let's say they know they want to do all of the digitization, but they have a serious budget constraints. How will they ever make the case for funding digital preservation?
Yeah, it's really tough. It's one of those things, as you think about adding up all of that, all of what you've spent in doing it, it usually adds up to be a really large number. And I think many funding agencies or people involved on boards and that, I don't know how they think that all this content gets put up on the web, and they think it's for free. And it is certainly not for free, and that's the case that you need to make, is that it is not free. It takes time, it takes the money that you've spent on any kind of scanners or equipment, or if you're outsourcing it, what you paid a vendor to scan, say, a collection of microfilm for you, so that you have your local newspaper to make available, or collections of images that you've paid to have scanned, or the time that you've spent scanning it and preserving it, and putting it on servers. That adds up to a lot of money. And so that's, I think, the most effective way to make the case for yourself is that. People seem to be able to understand that once you lay that out. The other thing I would say is, one thing that helps make the case is making the illustration of something that's personal to the people making these decisions. Almost everybody has lost content as they've changed computers. This has happened, to most people, I would say. I've lost content, images that I've had if I've changed computers and somehow the masters didn't get switched, or, it's a big process as you change machines, and that's something that people can relate to. And if you have the only objects of this kind, if you have content that is born digital, say, for instance, I don't know, some libraries have congressional collections, and the letters are, the congressional correspondence and the like are coming on hard drives. If you lose that, you've lost it, and it's gone. And so that's another thing that you can do to, make these cases, is kind of illustrate what would happen if you don't spend the money. It's often much more expensive than what you're asking for anyway.
Mm-hmm. And I think this actually ties into the next question, which I think you just addressed, but how do you have any advice for organizations undergoing a regime change? Our leadership is changing. How do we prove our case to the new boss? And I think you sort of touched on that a little bit, but I think it speaks to the initiatives of the new boss and trying to make it clear that this is a priority going forward, even with the new change in leadership.
Yeah, I think that's true, and, you may see this as an opportunity, here is a, sometimes a regime change is an opportunity to get your foot in the door and say, here's the planning that we've done. We've, you might say we've learned a lot about this, have attended these webinars, and we're trying to make a case, and just try to build a case as much as you can for the investment that you've made, both in terms of your staff time and actual real dollars. I think that people are probably, I would guess, people taking new positions now they may be more sensitive to this as they move forward. They don't want it going away on their watch. That's one thing as I've talked to administrators. They don't want to be responsible for the loss of a lot of digital content. And so that can sometimes work in your favor.
They don't want it to be their legacy.
Exactly. That's bad. It's like, oh, yeah, I lost the collection of X, Y, and Z that was given to us.
That's right. That was under my regime. Yay, what a great claim to fame. Okay, here's another one. You spoke about hackers. Any advice for how to best protect ourselves or our collections?
Yes, I would say if this is not your area of expertise, consult an expert, because it is not for the faint of heart. It is, these hackers are out there and actively pursuing these things. Even on any kind of server, I guarantee it gets hacked, and there are attempts at getting hacked. One thing is, with your own personal kind of things, keep your passwords. Don't use password, use some good passwords and real strong passwords.
Don't use the password called password?
No, or 1234,
Or 1234, yes.
Yeah. But, one thing that I've learned with this and being involved in library technology is that they have these huge networks of people that are looking for this, and that they look for any avenue in to use your computer. You may have them using your computer and you don't even know it. And a lot of that is they have these password cracking software, so any kind of proper nouns or just nouns, words, actual words, that's something that goes in their dictionary, and they can crack that easily. So mix it up, uppercase, lowercase, symbols, numbers. There are resources out there on the internet about how to create strong passwords that you can actually remember. It's not really helpful. It's not very good practice, I would say, to write your password down on a Post-it note and stick it on your computer. And I've seen that. I go around to people's desks and they've got their password posted on their computer because they can't remember it any other way. Mm-hmm. So but those are good personal practices. But for your organization, I would say, if at all possible, consult a professional and have virus protection on your machines, of course, and just be follow those kind of good computing practices whenever possible.
Okay, good. Thank you. That is it for right now, Mary.
All right.
Questions. So we'll let you take over again.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on to part 2 here, and this is really this is about providing access to this content. This is the whole reason for preserving it in the first place, is making sure that there's access to it long term. That that's the whole reason any of this matters at all, is to make sure that you have long-term access to this content. And this is just a review of where this falls within these modules. Really, all roads in preservation lead to access, and so that's why it comes last. And we talk about copyright some in this module because organizations do typically not get in trouble for preserving digital content. They get in trouble for bumping into intellectual property and other rights management issues when they provide digital content to users and to other people. So we'll talk a little bit about copyright and rights and licensing here. So preservation really means providing digital content over time, thanks to ongoing preservation programs that carry digital content over generations of technology to make the content usable and understandable to current users and to future users. Access delivery systems use cutting-edge technology to make this content available in the most expedient ways using latest technology available at any point in time. Preservation systems use proven, reliable, even stodgy technologies to make sure your digital content remains readable and understandable into the future. If you try to make one system do both, either preservation or access will suffer. System developers and managers decide there's too much preservation metadata, and too much preservation metadata is potentially risking future access, or that access needs more metadata, weighing it down and reducing the utility of access services. So you cannot really tune a single system to do both preservation and access. You develop systems that work side by side over time. So you have on one hand your preservation system that's saving like your master image files and the like, and then your access system that presents a small derivative file that's easily displayed on an access system. So it's really two sides of a coin with preservation and access. But without that preservation, you will not have that long-term access to your content. So really, long-term access needs to be planned intentionally and well managed. And here are the sort of aspects of that. It really needs to be easily provided to users using current and known technologies. Well documented, you need to have it well documented and well presented and in a coherent package. Intact, well-formed content. You need to have it consistent, formed according to policies, and have it presented equally, and just out there in all of these aspects really add up to a good, solid access system. I've had people I've talked to people in some kind of small historical societies here in Kentucky, and I'll ask them, how are they providing access to their content? And they'll say, well, we've got it up on a Facebook page, or we put it on our own web page. And that's really not a content management system. There are better ways to do this, and that will serve your users better, and that will work hand in glove with your preservation systems that ensure both aspects are really taken into account. So policies make consistent, sustainable access possible over time. Ad hoc decisions do not. And access and preservation systems really should work happily side by side, with the long-term access possible in partnership with your access system. Good practice really requires transparency, clear, well-documented decisions. You need to be able to manage your rights, your preservation rights, your privacy rights, and intellectual property rights from as close to creation as possible throughout the life cycle. And this will make it easier to preserve and provide that digital content. Waiting to address rights issues until you want to provide the content increases the possibility that you're going to encounter legal barriers. You don't want to go through the whole process and then at the end discover that you cannot make this content available to anybody because of legal restrictions. So that's one issue that really can set organizations on the wrong path if you don't think about these things from the very get-go. And that's something, as you look at that inventory that you create of your content, that rights issues are one of those things that should be one of the aspects that you're talking about and you're thinking about from the very beginning. It's like, do we have the rights to use this and to transform this? And if we don't have the rights, can we secure those rights? Can we get a legal agreement with either donors or the like that gave us the content to make that content available? And so you want to make sure that you think about how this is going to go through the life cycle of this content, and so that you can make it accessible over time. So when you think about access policies, some of the issues are listed here, and so we'll go through some of these issues. Who is allowed to have access to this content? So there are collections and in special collections kinds of situations that where it's restricted to, say, members of the community or people that come into the reference room or to a campus or to an organization, you know. So who is allowed to have access to this content? Is it free and open and available to everybody, or is it something that has restrictions? And you can work with both of these things, but you really need to think about who is going to have access and how is that defined, so it's really clear, so it's not like, oh, I think so. You know, you want to make sure that that you have that covered and you think that through. And are these access policies equal for all of your content? And you may have differences there. You may have some content that's accessible for one group and some not. There are things like embargo periods that you might want to think about. We have, for instance, a collection of newspapers that we've digitized, that we are receiving digital content from the publishers of those newspapers, and they would like us to put an embargo period of 6 months on that so that they can monetize and use that content from their own sites for the first 6 months of its life, and then after that they're comfortable with us making that available. So we just have to put in practice and put into place policies and procedures and technology aspects that will ensure that we follow that rule, that it's the content that we put up from the provider is at least 6 months old. So that's one example of how this is. Often in sort of special collections, or if you have a collection of oral histories, for instance, somebody may say, well, I will let this be available, but only after my death. And it's, you know, it's really the same as if you have your physical analog collections, your papers and that kind of thing. A lot of times the donor will say, I want this restricted until after my death, for a period of years after my death. And so you just have to have that documented so you can keep track of it, because it's not something that you want just in your head or, you know, in an agreement that's in the in your filing cabinet, because you want to make sure that should you leave the organization, those policies continue and are put into place. And so if you think about how are you going to manage that, you want to make sure that you have that documented and that those exceptions and special requests are well documented and you have procedures in place that will make that happen. And so then you think about, how do users get access? You know, some collections are available on request. And so if that's the case, how does a user do that, and how do they know how to do that? And what kind of options are there, if any? What are options that your users have? And so this is something that you might consider using the frequently asked questions that your users have as a guide to developing policies. If people are asking you over and over and over about something and you're making this decision over and over and over, that's something that really calls out and screams out for a policy, so that you can have that, you know, just transparent for your users. It helps everybody. It saves you answering a question over and over, and then helps your users know what the expectations are and how you're going to move forward with this. And so when you think about your access policies, think about how are you going to implement those. And so those decisions that you make, you can document those decisions and then translate those into policy statements. And you want to make sure that you think about as comprehensively as possible when developing your policies, so that you only have to, you know, so you have this done. You can revisit it periodically, and you should revisit it periodically, but you don't want to have to be doing this ad hoc over and over. This is not the efficient way to operate. You want to make sure that you're efficient, and it really says something about your organization to have this organized in a way that people know what the policies are. And so these access policies should really address the requirements for your preservation systems that will produce those access objects. And by this I mean that you have your objects in a place where they then create these small derivative files that are used for access. And that should be something that's routine, not be a manual process, something that is just inherent in the way you handle your content. And this can happen, more and more people are using these outsourced services where you contract with a vendor, and that's part of what you get when you contract with a vendor, is that access point and a preservation system at the same time. And you really need to think about how things are changing. As I mentioned before, mobile devices are such rise right now, and people want to access content on the move. And so you want to make sure that your delivery systems, your discovery systems really handle those kinds of changing technologies, because they will change even further. If we think technology is developed as much as it's going to, that is, we have been proven that that's not the case. And so we can expect things to have even more rapid changing environment as we move forward into the future. But you really need to make sure that your preservation systems and your procedures incorporate and reflect those access policy decisions that you're making about this content as you move forward. So there are various roles in an organization that can really work together to run an access system. And providing content, it benefits from a range of skills. And people in smaller organizations often wear many hats. And the roles discussed here may be performed by a small set of people, but the skills associated with those roles are important. While when wearing many hats, periodically check and see which hat do you have on or should you have on as you think through these decisions that you're making. And these roles include things like access service managers. So that person or that role really defines the services that are required for this. So you need to think about what kind of services are you going to provide, and how, what kind of expectations will there be for that. And then the policy developers, how do you capture those access decisions that are made? Then how the system developers, how do you enact those decisions that you make? The access system managers, the managers, how do you monitor that those decisions are being made? And user support, how do you help users? How do you answer those user questions about your content in the systems, and how do they access it through your discovery systems and the like? And this is, again, I emphasize, it's more than just a Facebook page. This is something that is a deliberate system where people can discover and access the things that you have spent all your energy in creating and preserving. And then you'll need system administrators, somebody to manage that environment. And as you look at outsourced systems, as you look at outsourced systems, you may think about somebody that would manage that environment for you. That's a service that you get as you contract with an outsourced system. And then, of course, the users. How do they understand and follow those rules? And how do you create the tools and frequently asked question lists and those kind of procedures that will help them understand and follow those rules and understand the licensing of your content, for instance, as you move forward. And when you think about your users, it's really important to think about those users and to understand not just users that you have now, but the future users. What will they need, or what will they want? What technologies will they be using? Ensuring that handshake from one generation of technology to the next makes it possible to move that content into a future that is unknown to us in the present. We want to make sure that we're making decisions about this content so that we know that it isn't a waste of time for now, and that will just create that underpinning and secure system as people move forward and use this content in the future. Because that's what it's all about, is creating this access for the long term, not just how are you going to handle it this year. You want to make sure that you're building systems that will move forward in time so that people don't lose access to that content. And so it may be possible to track and respond to your current users to know who are they and how are they using your content. You might do user surveys or some kind of a focus group and the like. And you really need to think about how you anticipate those needs of future users. And I think we're increasingly moving into an environment where we aren't face-to-face with our users. They are using us over the internet. They're finding our things from somewhere else. They do not walk in our doors necessarily. And so how do we capture that and make that understandable to our governing boards and our advisory boards that we're creating, gate counts are really becoming less and less a mark of success, I think, as we move forward. Just like in libraries, the number of objects that you have in your building are becoming less and less important or significant as a marker of success. It's more, what do you provide access to? So thinking about how are you anticipating those needs of the future users really helps you articulate for yourself what are your measures of success and how are you going to ensure that you are matching the mission of your institution. It's more than just the people that walk in the door. And people are expecting to access things electronically now. And I know I do. The first thing, just as an example, this first time a new restaurant opens, I'm online looking to see if I can find their menu. Well, that's a big change, and I think I'm not alone in that. I want to know what to expect when I go to a place, and we're finding as we provide this better access electronically that it actually drives business into our institutions. People will actually show up to see what else you have as your things go online. But there are many people that live far away or don't have the time or don't have the money to access your collections, that you want to document how are you going to provide this content and how are you providing that content to them and how do you document that to your funders and advisory boards and the like. It's really hard to predict what those future technologies are. As I look back at old documentation from the early 90s, for instance, it's like, oh my gosh, we had no idea. I remember seeing an article about digital paper, and I thought, oh, this is amazing. This is never going to happen. It's never going to happen in my lifetime. And here we have routinely reading things on an e-reader, for instance. It's like that digital paper is there, and it's maybe not exactly how it was predicted, but it's, the function is still the same. So it's really, it requires paying some attention to this, but we can't really predict everything, but we want to do everything we can to make sure that we're creating content and preserving it in a way that is standardized and that meets those standards to give it the best shot at moving forward and being able to provide access to it as we move forward. And preservation of that content really provides that pathway from one generation of technology to the next. And so we want to make sure that we're not using proprietary systems, and that, again, that exit strategy for how are you going to get content out of this system and into a different system without losing it. That's something that becomes even more and more important, particularly as you're spending a lot of time and a lot of money to do so. And so you think about how that digital content will be packaged for delivery at specific points over time, and make your best effort and best guesses. Will we be 100% successful in this? No. I mean, I can guarantee we will lose content over time. Just as you change computers, you're bound to lose some content. But hopefully we'll get better and better at this, so so the risk is less and less over time. So when we think about those legal issues, those life cycle legal issues, it really underscores the importance of thinking through agreements, contracts, licenses, etc. from the get-go, and having that identified with your content. You don't want your inventory to not have this information, because inevitably you're going to have to go back and figure it out. And this is something that will help you as you prioritize what are you going to make available. One of those factors could be, what do you have licensed to make available? And maybe that's where you put your energies first of all. So you need to think about that. Now these legal questions really emerge throughout this life cycle. And you know, I'm not a lawyer, and most of us in this work are not lawyers. We just have to make sure that we understand contracts, understand agreements, and have agreements for this content so that we have our best shot at not having legal troubles downstream. And so these legal issues can include copyright, but copyright is really only a portion of this. A lot of it can be licensing issues. Somebody may actually hold the copyright but give you rights to put it up, and you want to make sure that's documented. It's not just on somebody's word. You want to make sure that you have a license for this, because this will ensure that you won't have trouble downstream, or that as you change regimes or change staff, as you leave an organization, you don't want to leave with that knowledge in your head. That you want to make sure that's documented so that whoever takes your place in the future would know what those decisions are. It's not this big scrambling. I've been on the result end of the scrambling before, and it is not pretty. You end up kind of sorting out these issues after the fact, and it's difficult. It's a lot more difficult after the fact than it is from the get-go. And so as we take collections, for instance, as we take on responsibility for collections, one thing that is part of that, and that must be a part of that, is licensing and making sure that you have access and permission to make this available. And if you don't, that's a big red flag, I think, in terms of what you take, what you spend your energy on. You know, it doesn't have to be immediate access, but you want to make sure that it's not no access. So that's something as you to think about as you move forward. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Creative Commons licensing. Likely you are, and you have heard of this. This is probably not news to you. But there is something called Creative Commons licensing, where you can actually be explicit in identifying and labeling content so that everybody, your users, everybody knows what the license is. And there are various kinds of licensing, from very wide open licenses to very restrictive licenses. And so when you think about this, you know, you might want to think about your content and apply a Creative Commons license to it that's made available in the metadata and explicitly on however you're delivering it, so that everybody knows what the expectation is and how you can use that. For instance, this let me see if I can do this. Oops. This license right here, this CC BY, that lets others use and distribute and remix and tweak and build upon your work, even commercially, as long as they credit you for the original creation. So this is the most accommodating of licenses offered. It's recommended for maximum dissemination and use of licensed materials. And there are attribution non-commercial CC BY. So this is the non-commercial CC BY. So you can use it, remix it, users can redo it, but it must be non-commercial. So really, these licenses vary, and they're very on the Creative Commons website, which I have listed here. That's something that they're all explicit and explained very clearly. Public domain is something that CC0 license is public domain, and that's a public domain mark, and that tells people that it's in the public domain and that we're affirming that it's available, and that the person using CC0 dedicates a work to the public domain by waiving all copyright and neighboring related rights, so that's so that anybody could use it to do anything with. So that's a very non-restrictive license. So this is something that as you put up content in an access system, you might really seriously consider identifying the rights and looking at Creative Commons and licensing it. That's really just such a help to your users. And you can do this methodically. You don't have to go back and do it with all the content you have. But as you take on new collections and digitize new collections, you can think carefully about what kind of rights there are and label it as such, and that really helps users moving forward. So when you think about your role in life cycle legal issues, if you know who your legal advisor is, and you develop a sound working relationship with that person. For me, it's our grants and contracts and in the legal affairs office here on campus. And so they know what I'm up to and they know what our issues are, and I just keep them informed as we move forward, and they help assess the risk that we're at if we do something. They want to make sure that the organization is protected, and the organization in my case is the University of Kentucky. They want to make sure that we're not sued and that we have everything, all our ducks in the row. And it's their responsibility to really help me. But they help me by me helping them in understanding that. And it's been an education process over the years that I work with them to make sure that they understand what my issues are and so we work, it's a partnership really. And so as you document and preserve those decisions that you make about the legal issues, that needs to be added into, say, your inventory documents so that you have access to that. So you don't have that separated out into another place. If you have that added in, this is your inventory that you start building around your digital content will just build, build, build and become even more valuable as time goes on. And so you want to make sure that you have everything documented. So again, as personnel change or as the organization changes, it's all documented. And so you want to really think about balancing legal requirements and long-term access expectations and responsibilities. And it is a balancing act. You want to make sure that you're not so restrictive that you're not putting anything up, and it's a risk management kind of thing. Occasionally there will be collections that we'll put up. We're not 100%, we've got some things we've identified that we're not 100% sure of the rights, and a lot of things that fit in the orphan works category kind of go there, but we're prepared to take things down immediately. So maybe that's something that you think through. It's like, what is our risk? And it's a low risk, likely, we can't find the rights holders on some of this old content that we have, but we're prepared that if it's ever challenged, we will take it down immediately. So just kind of think that through. But that's something that you work out with your legal advisors. You want to make sure you're not out there on your own, that you have the buy-in from either your administration or your board or your legal team to make sure that you're not putting your organization at risk. And then be prepared to ask their advice and then heed their advice. That's the other thing. It doesn't do any good to ask it if you just go off and do whatever you want anyway. And sometimes the answer is you have to take it down or you can't put it up, and there's a lesson there. And so when you think about sustainable access, effective and sustainable digital preservation programs address these factors, and these are from this Blue Ribbon Task Force report on sustainable preservation and access, and I believe I've included that in one of the other webinars resources list. I think there's a link to that, but you can Google this and get access to this Blue Ribbon Task Force report. It's a very, very good document. It's worth the reading, and it really outlines what are the characteristics of an effective and a sustainable digital preservation program. And so it's these qualities include the value, that you understand and stress the content's value, that you have those roles defined, that you identify your stakeholders and involve all the stakeholders along the way, be it advisory boards, be it technical people, be it your policy people, whatever it is, that there are incentives that you identify. What are the reasons? What are those carrots for preserving that content? And that you identify and address those costs across the life cycle, that you add that up, and that really underscores the reason for doing all this work. And so all these factors together really move forward to create this digital preservation program that you can be proud of, and that will ensure sustainability and access to your content over time. And so really today we've talked about all this, that having clear access policies that address, that you need to have those access policies that address this long-term access, and so that you have that identified, it's transparent to everybody throughout the organization, and these really help set your organizing principles there. And that there is a link between that preservation and access over time, where it's a balancing act with current access and long-term access. And so you need to make sure that your preservation system provides that long-term, and that your current system provides access to your users currently and then in the future, and thinking about that. And that you, when you think about a preservation system, that there's the capacity to create this dissemination package, that these small deliverables that using current technologies that will make it so that you can provide access to this, and that you are aware of and have control over those rights management issues from creation and or deposit as you move forward. And so that's pretty much it. That brings us to looking at the resources and taking questions. Now let me back out of this and pull over this. You should be able to see this. This is our resource list for this module. And I've listed some things here that are about policies and planning. And they're, as you look at these documents, some of these can help you think through these things and are really good background documents. And then there are some like copyright things. Here's a link to the Creative Commons. There's some tools to help you determine what copyright are and intellectual property issues. There's this copyright slider here that you can, it kind of tells you where you are on that continuum with copyright. And information about copyright and public domain. This is an excellent document by Peter Hurdle that I highly recommend this. And it really, if you don't know, if copyright is kind of new to you or you're not sure where you stand with it, and a lot of times with this digital content, that'll be an issue, that you're not a copyright expert, but these are some resources that can help you get up to speed and get a better handle on that as you take in content and as you create that content.
Mary,
so, yes.
Mary, we just had a question fly by us regarding the resources you just showed. Do you have any other recommendations for workshops or webinars where people can actually take training on some of the copyright issues?
Well, there are some out there, Peter Hurdle used to offer a copyright workshop, and I don't have any specific recommendations actually. Now, I would say if somebody is interested in more digital preservation training, including copyright kind of issues, the Depot program, I just came from a meeting last week with our Depot steering team at the Library of Congress, and we're rolling out a nationwide, this is a nationwide program for developing trainers, and it's kind of a train the trainers network that we're creating. And so there are opportunities. If people are interested, it would be great if we had sort of a cohort there in New York or in the Northeast region to offer this kind of thing. Now, specific copyright workshops, though, I'm not aware of any, but there may be some linked. We have a resources list that we're building on the Depot website at the Library of Congress, and my recommendation is that we would include those kinds of things. So that might be a place to check periodically.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. And just so everyone knows, the slide that Mary had shown with all the resources will be part of the content that will be available and that Carrie will be sending to everyone and will be on the C2C NYS website. Oh, Carrie told me it's already up. It's there waiting for everybody. Okay.
Carrie's on it.
She's on it, I know. She's got a thumb on the pulse of it. Then we do have some other questions. Shall I share them with you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. What if we have a collection that was donated, but the donor does not want to provide digital access ever?
My thought on this, and this happens from time to time, that somebody will donate a collection and they don't want to provide that digital access. That's a big red flag for me, and I would be really hesitant to take a collection under those circumstances because it's going to hamstring you as you move forward in the future. As we think about how our organizations are changing over time, it's really, I can envision a time where we don't have a physical place to walk into a lot of places. Now, your organization may be very, very different than that. If you're in a museum and, you're depending on people walking into your facility to see things, that might be a different story. But for many, I don't know, it depends on the mission of your institution, I think. If you're a library, for sure, I would really be hesitant on taking a collection that really has no digital rights ever. You may have things in your collections already that you have to renegotiate rights to and go back to your donors, and that's, we're playing catch-up with a lot of this because we've taken in collections that don't have access permissions. But one thing I'm finding with people as we go back and talk to donors, they're more and more willing to do that. Now, you might be able to work with your donor and convince them, make a good case for it'll increase visibility, increase access, more people will be using it, it's to the public good, those kind of things. You may be able to make a case for that with that person. They may think that they don't want digital rights ever, but as you talk to them, you might be able to convince them.
Have you ever run into any organizations that had collections that were being held but without providing immediate access?
Yes, our special collections, that's something that happens all the time. People will donate collections and not want them made available for a period of time, a long embargo period. And we're trying to cut that down as much as possible, make that a shorter period. Is that what you mean, Priscilla?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, because we have, for instance, we had, let's see, some oral history collections. That's one thing that comes to mind. Often somebody will do some oral history interviews, and they say things in these oral history interviews that they, after the fact, they think, I wish I hadn't said that, or they'll, some political figures, we had one I can think of that talked about other people that he was involved with, and that they would go out on the weekends and they had these parties, and then these women came to these parties, and he said this all in this oral history. At the end of the interview, he said, now I don't want this made available until after I'm dead. And it's like okay. And then he died the next year, and it's like, hey, these people are still around, So it creates a dilemma for an institution. It's like, what do you do, So, but that's an extreme example, really. But there are collections that come that people have the conception also that if you provide access to it, then people won't come into an institution, and that's really proven to not be the case.
Funny. Okay, now we have another question that's being typed in as we speak. Do you recommend accepting? No, not accepting, basically. I think she was saying that, whoever was typing that in. So basically, if they won't give you access, don't accept it.
Yeah, that's a decision you need to make, But, such a red flag, I would think twice. I would examine the rationale. What is it? Why would they not want a collection, accessible? But if it's not accessible, that really hamstrings you, and it really you're just essentially serving as a storage facility for their stuff. And you've got enough on your plate, generally speaking, to not make that worth your time.
Okay. And then we have one more question. As I tell Mary this question, if anyone else has any others, please go right ahead and type them on into Carrie. Here's the other one. How do you recommend preserving an online exhibition we've created?
Oh gosh, that's really tricky. Of course, the individual objects are one thing, but this is in the category of, as you look at all your stuff, maybe that's not where you start, but you want to make sure the individual objects that are included in that exhibition are secure, and that you have that, and then that you have it well documented of what the exhibition was, all the content that goes along with it, the surround material. I would guess that you have images and then you have text. You want to make sure that those relationships are maintained so that if you had to construct this again at some point in the future, you could do that. But the actual mechanism, that kind of goes to, it's a little more complicated because it goes to maintaining software, or if it's a web kind of based thing, it's not unlike preserving a web page, which is really tricky, because it's this changing, moving environment. So I think, you think of your worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario is that you want to make sure all your digital objects that you've included in that exhibit and the surround materials are preserved so that it can be easily reconstructed, and the relationships of that material. Say if you have several pages and you have several objects on a page, you want to make sure that all those relationships are maintained and well documented so that it could be recreated. But, as technology changes, it's a little tricky, as software changes and the like, to preserve the look and feel of it presents a bigger challenge, I think.
Okay. Good. Well, I think that was the last of our questions right now, Mary. Oh, wait, here comes another one. Okay, we have multiple past digitization projects. In order to start a plan for a digitization preservation system, what would be the best resource to use to start the list/inventory community-based organization?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand. Could you read that one more time? Multi-path kind of thing.
Okay, one more time. And the person who wrote this is Emma. If Mary has a question, you could just keep typing in and address it. We have multiple past digitization projects.
Oh, multiple past.
Past, yeah.
Okay.
In order to start to plan for a digitization preservation system, what would be the best resource to use to start the list or the inventory?
I would say this goes back to, and I think we addressed this in the first one, but and if you haven't gone through that first module, I highly recommend you do it. But generally speaking, I advise people to use a tool that they have, that they already have, and that they are familiar with. Don't think of buying a whole nother inventory system, because it makes it more onerous process than it really needs to be. Excel spreadsheets, just start in by starting, and as you think about those things, you can build it, you start building it. You may have some going back, it's like, oh, as we get into this, as we've typed in several, maybe we need a field for licensing, or now that you know about licensing, you'll put that in at the beginning. But it may come to you as you do that. But I would say just a simple Excel spreadsheet with those factors about the thing, like who created it, where it is, how big it is, when was the last time it was accessed, or that kind of thing. If you know that who, why, when, where, how kind of thing about the content, that's a really good start. And if you know how to use Excel and a spreadsheet, use that. And I think that's a really good place to start.
Good, and something we all have.
Yeah, something that everybody has, and that people, if you get new people into your organization, they know how to use it. It's not going to require a lot of training. And I know, there are inventory control systems, or database kind of things. But, if it's going to take a big learning curve for you, I wouldn't start with that. I would start with something that's doable, so you have this sense of success also, so you can get some things in it. And then, because you can do sorts on it, you can have set priorities, you could have a priority kind of column for your content and do a sort on it, and it makes it a usable tool.
Okay. Good. Well, look, I think that must have answered her question, and we don't have any more. The dashboard is clear. So I think that is the end of the Q&A right now.
Okay.
So why don't we take control back of the presentation?
All right. Well, let me just say it's been such a pleasure doing this series with you all. And if people have questions, please, let me kind of move this. If people have questions for me, please feel free to ask and to contact me. I've had a couple of people do that, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Very good. And as you can see, the resources are at the bottom of the page. And not to worry about sitting there and trying to write it all down, everybody. We will send you that link, so you'll be able to, in an email to you, so you'll be able to access it at any time. And do you have the slide with all of Mary's contact information? Okay. Okay, and before we get to that, Carrie reminds me, we definitely want to let you all know about the circuit riders. As I mentioned before, the circuit rider is an opportunity for a consultant to come to your site for half a day for free on any collections care issue it may be on the digitization projects that you have going or thinking about doing. It could be your archive, disaster preparedness, it could be your paper collections, your photograph. You may need to talk about your policy and procedures for managing your collections. Whatever it may be, you are more than welcome to have a circuit rider come to you for free, as I mentioned, for half a day. And they can come more than once as long as it's on a different collections care issue. So if you're interested, what you would need to do is to go to the www.c2cnys.org webpage, and you'll see at the very top it's Circuit Riders, and you can sign right up for it there and be able to reach out to me. There's Mary's contact information. You can see her email address, and please, you're so kind to offer that. If you have any questions, just shoot her a quick email. That's very generous of her time, and hopefully she'll be able, I know she will, be able to help you out on some of that. Or if you have any questions about the program in general or any of the content, even specifically about catching up on the previous webinars that you've missed, you can give us a call at the number on the screen or at the email address that you see in front of you as well. Please keep an eye on your email, because towards the end of the week you will receive a couple of things. One is an email with a link to a survey. If you could just take a moment to fill it out, that is incredibly useful for us to be able to figure out what your needs are and how we can make the program better in the future. But also, even more importantly, it has the link to today's recording, to all the resources, and to the transcript. So if you have any trouble accessing that, please let us know. But once you receive it, you'll be able to view it as often as you like and as many times as you like. It'll be yours to own going forward. So this brings us to the end of today's webinar. We'd like to again thank Mary, our fantastic webinar instructor for today on digital content, and for all the webinars that she's put on for this summer. I know that we have quite a bit of a task in front of us, but an important one to get going and getting all of the content digitized so it can be preserved for future generation. And would like to thank all of our partners for the Connecting to New York's program collections. You can see their logos are listed there. Thank you for their time and their resources and their support of this program. And I also wanted to thank Carrie Sclafani, who was the coordinator for today's IT and making sure everything ran smoothly as always. And just as an FYI, I want to also thank the Southeast Library Resource Council. We have been running these webinars out of their office. They have been very generous in their time and their resources in allowing us to be able to run this out of their IT. And that would be specifically to Tessa Killian, to Jennifer Palmentiero, and to Zach Spalding, and to their Executive Director, John Schlenko, for allowing us to be here today. So thank you all very much. We wish you all the best. And again, if you have any questions about any of the content, please feel free to reach out to us at Greater Hudson. And we wish you a very happy summer. Take care, everyone.